Hey there, this is Hannah, Chief Rebel at DeSkills. Imagine your high schooler could learn to harness artificial intelligence to solve real world problems for small businesses and nonprofits. Imagine they could get paid doing these impact projects on the weekends or summer break. And imagine that as a result, they could leave high school with more experience and connections than most college graduates. That's DeSkills. Learn more at deskills.io. That's dskills.io.
This podcast is funded by Ted Dintersmith, the executive producer of the acclaimed film Most Likely to Succeed, and the author of the best-selling book What School Could Be.
Hey everyone, welcome to the What School Could Be podcast. I am your host, Josh Rapoon. Before we start the show, please check out all the resources at whatschoolcouldbe.org and our global online community. If you are a committed education change agent ready to roll up your sleeves and reimagine teaching and learning, simply install the What School Could Be app on your mobile device or navigate to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org. I hope to see you there. My guest today is Kris Swett, who wrote the following, quote, "My passion is for the alternative, making sure schools can better serve different students' needs. My life's work is to create alternative education models. Conventional schooling is falling by the wayside, and technology and a global community becomes our new reality. We cannot teach the students of the future with the ways of the past," end quote. Though Kris has held a number of roles in education, today's episode is going to focus a great deal on his time as the principal at South Valley High School, which became, under his leadership, Big Picture Ukiah. It is a remarkable story, listeners, worthy of your time. Kris has a master's in education from Cal State Chico, with an emphasis on curriculum and instruction and school leadership. His bachelor's is in political science with an emphasis in international relations and economics, also from Cal State Chico. Kris writes, quote, "I am a Northern California native and the son of an elementary school teacher and union leader. I am described as restless and always full of new ideas. My path to becoming a principal was not a straight journey. I began my adult life as a bartender and manager of a Michelin-rated restaurant in rural Northern California. I then became a high school teacher, teaching mostly social studies with a smattering of English, math, independent study, and physical education. I love being with students and challenging them to think. They showed their appreciation for me by selecting me as the 2007 Teacher of the Year," end quote. Robert Landau, who first introduced me to Kris, as together they launched what is called Impact, a project that exists at the cutting edge of what school could be and what could be school, wrote the following about Kris for this episode. Quote, "In August 2020, I, along with many others, believed that the worldwide pandemic might spark a global transformation in education. While this didn't fully materialize, I designed a framework for the future called Impact. While searching for thought partners, a trusted friend, Scott Pollan, recommended I meet Kris Swett. The rest, as they say, is history. Kris is a dynamic, passionate, and determined change agent. It has been wonderful to find someone so committed to leaving theory behind, rolling up his sleeves, and getting in the trenches to make schools better and more equitable for all students. It is an honor to pass my baton to Kris Swett," end quote. And now, here's my conversation with Northern California's Kris Swett. Kris, welcome to the What School Could Be podcast.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
So Kris, let's imagine a large audience of young people interested in playing a sport sitting in the school gym's bleachers and you were up on stage with a group of folks making pitches for the sport they love. So the baseball players pitching the idea of playing baseball, same for swimming, lacrosse, hockey, etc. And you were there to make a pitch for trying disc golf as a sport. And you were the last to make a pitch, and you have everybody's attention, Kris. So ready, set, go.
Disc golf, my love. So disc golf is a truly amazing sport in the sense that you get to go outside, you play at your own pace. You're out in nature in some of the most beautiful areas, especially here in Northern California, underneath the oak trees or the redwoods. You are throwing this little piece of plastic that can fly anywhere from about 100 feet to literally 700 feet if you're really good. And you can just watch this thing glide through the air and into the most unexpected situations and areas that force the players to make determinations about how they're going to get themselves out of the problem and into this tiny or relatively tiny basket. And it uses not just arm strength, but it uses full body motion. And it's just a truly amazing sport. It's cheap. There's no cost to play other than the discs themselves. And there is a community that is growing at an exponential rate that is helping each other out. And it's just an amazing sport. So let's go from there.
What does it feel like when you're out playing disc golf? I mean, I was thinking about this the other day, Kris, because, I swim early in the morning, but I know it sounds strange, but when I swim, and this is in the ocean, long distance for my exercise, I often daydream about my days playing football in high school while I'm swimming. And I think about what it felt like to play football. And what does it feel like to play disc golf?
Well, as a baseball player, there's a lot of similarities with the motion of swinging the baseball bat to swinging your arm for a long drive in disc golf. And so there is definitely some parallels there. And so being out on the course, you get to utilize parts of your body that you don't typically do in any other sport, and you can play the game of disc golf. I've played with 60 and sometimes 70-year-old players, both men and women, and it's a sport you can play forever. And you also get to play right alongside 10-year-olds and 17-year-olds. And it's just such a beautiful place to be outside, and especially with us all being so tied to our digital technologies and devices, to get outside and give a reason to go for a nice long hike in the morning or in the afternoon with some purpose is one of the most beautiful parts about it. Otherwise, I don't know if I would go outside a whole lot more and be active.
Have you played outside of your home base in Northern California? And if yes, what's the coolest place you've ever played?
Well, Northern California is amazing. It is like a minor mecca up here where I live in Ukiah. There's multiple courses within a 30-mile radius, which most places do not have. But having said that, the place where a lot of people go to play is typically North and South Carolina. And I've played a number of courses there because I used to live out there for just a short, brief amount of time. But it is because it's perpetually green out there. The grass areas it's amazing. And it's you can play the sport basically year round out there. And yeah, it's just a beautiful, beautiful place to play. So North Carolina, those are the areas for sure.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. Okay. So slight left turn here, Kris. I love stories from educators that are about the lives that they lived before getting into education. And in your case, you served as a bartender and manager at a Michelin-rated restaurant, which you said is just like teaching, but harder. So how so? And what, Kris, are the transferable skills and habits and dispositions that you carry with you each day today from those 13 years that you did that work?
Right. When I graduated from college, I had a little bit of time working in restaurants. And so I didn't know what I wanted to be. And yet, even here I am at this age, still wondering what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. But one of the great things was to make a lot of money in a short amount of time in the restaurants post graduating with my BA. And so I worked in this restaurant called Santi. It doesn't exist any longer in Geyserville, which is in Northern California. And I ended up learning how to bartend and standing behind that, those wonderful, beautiful bars where you get to interact and with your patrons, many of whom become regulars, but many who just kind of come through to kind of look and wonder what the place is all about. And so the job itself of being a bartender, where you're managing not only the drinks you're making and managing all of the parts that make the restaurant run, at the same time, you're also managing the people on the other side of the bar who watch you, and whatever kind of person is sitting across that bar is you have no control over. And I also, just to put perspective into this, when I went to go get my master's, I got my master's at Chico State, and I was a bartender at a white collar restaurant, pretty high end restaurant in Chico, and so where students would show up every once in a while, but it was chaotic. There would be times where there were 2 to 3 people deep on the other side of the bar, and your job was not just to serve them drinks, but to also make them feel like they were seen and heard and respected. And so I think if you would talk to anyone that used to come to my bar, my job, which I actually would surprise myself, was to really figure out a way to be as busy as possible, but get those brief moments to stop, look people in the eye, and ask about them in their day, and keep up with their stories, and understand that whatever they're bringing to that bar at that moment is a reflection of what happened to them that day. And as you can see where I'm going with this, it is exactly the same thing that you deal with in a classroom setting.
Yep.
And managing chaos, in the sense of you've got kids coming from homes and situations that are completely out of your control as a teacher, same with the bar, and trying to make sure that those people feel loved and respected, and that whatever behavior that they're presenting in front of you at that moment in time is not because of you. Now, I could say or do something in front of a classroom or in front of my patrons at the bar that would upset them or make them feel happier. But ultimately, at the end of the day, whatever happened before that moment was, out of my control. And it's not my fault that they came to me with those situations. And so managing all of that at the same time, yes, bartending is much harder because you're doing 5 things at once, as opposed to teaching, you're typically doing maximum 2, sometimes 3 things. And so, yeah, there's a lot of parallels there.
That's just so fascinating, Kris. My first career was as a chef in California way back in the 70s. And then I made the switch over I was a very introverted kid. I think I still am, but I made the switch over to hotel management, front office management. And my first job was in San Diego, and that was a small hotel. But the second job was at a giant hotel in Waikiki here in Hawaii, where I live. And I think back to the next career, which was teaching, and that it was the flow of people, hundreds of people, thousands of people every day coming to that front desk, checking in, checking out, complaints. They were happy about things. They were not happy about things. That may have been the best training for becoming a teacher, I feel like, and it sounds like that's kind of the case for you.
Oh, 100%. I think, I am an introvert as well, and you have to learn how to be extroverted in those situations, but it's very draining for me, and it sounds like probably for you.
Yeah.
But you learn how to turn it on, and if you know that the purpose of the job is to make other people feel heard and respected, and or being somebody who is in the classroom who's trying to learn, they're not going to learn, and they're not, unless they feel like they're being heard or that there's love coming at it from the other end.
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time, in the classroom, especially with kids, with highly at-risk kids who I used to say don't have either intrinsic or extrinsic motivators. And so your job is to figure out how to be that person that maybe they will work for that one person in their life that actually cares. And then hopefully that would bleed and morph into something that becomes intrinsic. But all those skills that I learned behind that bar absolutely translated over.
Okay, so continuing on with your experience as you were sort of quote unquote growing up and getting older, while at Cal State University at Chico, you were the commissioner of student groups, which included the Greek system and women's and Pan-Arab groups, etc. So what was that experience like? And in what ways do you carry those organizing skills and I suppose dispositions as well in your proverbial backpack?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I think it was actually quite a turning point in my life to be appointed that position. I ran originally as the vice president and then pulled out of the race because I just didn't feel right. But ultimately, the person who won the presidency for Chico State that year, I knew pretty well. He was a much older man as a student there who had been involved at Chico and Chico politics for a long time. And he appointed me this position, which he basically just created on the fly. And ultimately, it was to do what you said. It was to meet with all the groups on campus and have a forum for them to talk together and address concerns on campus. And it was such a wonderful moment to be able to interact with people from all over the world. I mean, Chico State also, they, just like a lot of other universities, attracted people from all over the world. There was a prince that was from the UAB on that campus, and people from all over the place that would come, and they didn't feel like they had any power. And so when we pulled them together, and I pulled them together into this one meeting once a month, I realized how much power we had, and to be able to stand in front of them and ultimately direct conversations and then come out of that and say, look, we know that there's some problems and I'm going to lead this effort with you around issues and give them a voice. We ended up making some changes on the campus that were they were so intense and successful that we ultimately got disbanded the next the next president that came in, because we were able to make huge changes. And ultimately, at the end of the day, to address your question, the ability to listen and hear people from all sides and see that the commonalities between these very different groups were so similar.
Yeah.
It was just the human experience that women on campus were not feeling safe at that moment because there were a series of sexual assaults, and a lot of them that year. We found there were problems that they were being underreported, and we put in lights. We did all kinds of things, and I saw at that moment that it didn't matter what you look like or where you're from. The human experience it transcends all these cultural boundaries that just made us want to work together. And so I knew that was an area that I wanted to continue to pursue. So,
yeah. So I had to go in this direction, Kris, because of what's been happening recently. So, given your experience as the commissioner of student groups, what are your thoughts right now about the student protests that were happening on college campuses in the lead up to the 2024 graduation season? Like, what is your big picture view of these student protests, if you will, and how do you see them in terms of the fabric of our democracy? And then you're seeing them clearly through the lens of your experience way back when you were commissioner of student groups at Cal State Chico.
yeah, well, somebody said, and forgive me, I can't quote who said it, but I think they're right, is that if you look throughout history, especially recent history, the student protests and student groups tend to always be on the correct side at the end of the day, even if we don't figure it out for a few decades. And so when I saw these protests, I thought, well, great. This is absolutely needed. The voices of the students need to continually be heard, despite whatever side you lean towards or on. The ability for our youth to still feel like they can come out and say something without being, well, hopefully incarcerated or worse because of their views, I think is extremely important. I am a little concerned with the newest group of students the younger ones, the ones that I'm working with now, they seem to be awfully passive. They have strong feelings, but it doesn't feel like that they feel they have the urgency or the agency to say anything that's going to matter. But then you see things like this, right? And I think it's been wonderful that their voices are being heard. Whether or not anything is going to come out of it in the short run that is positive, we'll have to wait and see. But typically just having those voices come out is the first big step. I'm worried. I'm very worried about what will happen in the near future, depending on what happens with our political situation. Very, very worried. But at the same time, our kids they've got strong opinions and they are right on. They're speaking up maybe very quietly about situations that they feel are issues that are very, very real, and I'm hoping that they will find their voice soon.
Yeah, and our work as adults and as educators is to help coach and advise and mentor them as they develop their voices. Of course, I mean, that has to be our role. So kind of along the same lines, and before we go to break and before we get into the specifics, Kris, of your work in the Ukiah Unified School District, I'm going to ask you to tell an origin story. So you shared with me a letter of recommendation that was written on your behalf, which I'm going to quote from. Here goes. So, quote, Kris Swett is a tireless, outspoken advocate for marginalized young people. I have personally witnessed Kris speaking up in district leadership meetings to lobby on the behalf of at-risk and underrepresented students on multiple occasions, end quote. So I wonder if you can take us back to the origins of your deep feelings for at-risk, marginalized, and underrepresented kids. Like, what is that story, and what are some of the key waypoints along the timeline?
Yeah, I don't, honestly, I've tried to figure this out myself. And so I'll do the best I can to figure out, explain to me where this comes from. But I'll start with the fact that my mother and father moved with me as a young child to Santa Rosa, California. And we moved to a fairly poor area of the town where I was thrown into a mix of people from all different backgrounds and cultures. My mom comes from a very wealthy family. Father was a doctor, had nice cars. And so being around that a lot, I knew how to navigate through people who come from a lot of money. And then being a young child, I think we moved there, I was about first or second grade, thrown into an area that I was basically in the middle of gang territory and people who had very little. I had to figure out how to navigate that as well. And just as anyone would do, you adapt and you figure things out. As I grew up, even though my friend group changed in high school, maybe a little bit in junior high, I still had my roots in that neighborhood. And I was, without any intentional thought around this, the groups just started to move apart in the sense of who did you hang out with in high school or in junior high was kind of who you looked like. And it bothered me, but I wasn't really able to process it on that level. But the years went on into my lighter youth and, my higher high school levels, those friends that I lived in the neighborhood with would still come around, right? Whenever I would get in trouble or in a situation, they would show up out of nowhere, right? I would still go home to these neighborhoods where it was very, very violent. We had drugs in the streets and needles. I had, there was gang tagging everywhere. Our house was broken into. I had been beat up a few times. But then at school, I was hanging around with the rich kids because they looked more like me. And so, and I always thought it was very wrong. And I don't know why. I knew that there was problems. I didn't understand why these huge gaps between my friends and the people I grew up with even existed. And so because I was able to do that, I think the rest of my life was built around this idea that there are huge injustices between people socially, economically. And I just thought it was wrong. And school, right? Knowing a lot of my friends that I grew up with as a young child didn't work for them. The system didn't work the same way for them that it did for me and the other group of friends. It just always really rubbed me the wrong way. And without being able to really pinpoint any particular event, I just went through the rest of my life with a bit of a chip on my shoulder where I had anger around all of this, and knowing at the same time that I couldn't really do much about it and that I was privileged and I didn't understand exactly why. I mean, clearly it had to do with the color of my skin. There's no doubt, no question about it, especially compared to the friends that I had, and that I had huge opportunities that they didn't have. There's, even to this day, I just felt like maybe it was a misplaced energy into trying to stand up for the friends, effectively, my old friends. But I still just I get it. I understand, I genuinely get it. And I knew that if anybody could speak for a group of people that didn't necessarily have a voice in the same forums that I had, then I was going to stand up and speak for them. And that might upset some people by hearing that. But it just is something that drives me. And even to this day.
Wow. That's so interesting, Kris. And actually, that's a perfect segue to my next question, which is going to come after the break. So, hey, everyone. We have been talking to Kris Swett, who, among many things, cares deeply about student agency and student-driven learning. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Do you believe there's a better way for individuals to learn and fulfill their human potential than in traditional schools? If so, then join me on my 2 podcasts, The Future of Education and Future You, where we explore these issues and more. My name is Michael Horn, and I've been working to build a better future for all individuals for over 15 years. I'm the co-author of multiple books on the future of learning, including my latest, From Reopen to Reinvent. And you can also stay up to date with all my writing through my Substack newsletter, The Future of Education. Join me as we create the future of learning together.
What does the future of learning look like? All the big changes going on in tech and society these days are raising tough and fascinating questions about education and where it's going. We dig into those questions every week on the EdSurge podcast. I'm Jeff Young, an editor and a reporter at EdSurge, and I sit down with educators, students, and scholars for frank and in-depth conversations about how education is changing. You can find the EdSurge podcast wherever you listen, or just go to edsurge.com and click on the podcast link. I hope you'll check it out.
Hi, I'm Ricardo.
I'm Mary.
And I'm Liz.
And we co-host Course Stories, a podcast produced by the Instructional Design and New Media team at Arizona State University.
In this podcast, we tell an array of course design stories alongside other ASU online designers and faculty.
Join us as we talk to the course design experts about shaping the future of online education. Tune into Course Stories, where innovation meets instruction.
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts.
Course Stories!
Perfection.
Hey everyone, we are back with progressive educator Kris Swett, who is coming to us today from very rural Ukiah in Northern California. So continuing along those lines, Kris, 4 years ago, you wrote a blog post whose first paragraph reads, and bear with me, this is a long quote, "Not too long ago, on a warm, sunny day, I was sitting down at a local coffee shop chatting about the state of education and our kids with somebody who I deeply respect. They told me something that changed my entire view of education. That something was so simple but so profound that it completely changed my career and my life. It was a simple thing. They said, 1. So, wow, okay, changing your entire view of education is a pretty strong statement. So what is this idea of 1, and do you still feel the same about it today?
Yeah, I absolutely do. 1, it's the idea that we know that kids and adults come from extreme trauma. In many cases, we don't even know that they've come from that trauma as onlookers or friends or just colleagues. We have to know that the behaviors that we see in our kids and our students are typically the negative behaviors specifically are driven from trauma that's happened in their life somewhere along the way. And the kid, the student, may not even know what that trauma was, but they're showing signs of post-traumatic stress. And so what we discussed on that particular day was around resiliency and how to help kids heal from these problems. And when you look at the data and you look at the science about how people heal from trauma, there are many strategies, but at the end of the day, it really takes one person who cares deeply about another person going through that trauma or on the back end of it that will be the most effective. And, again, at the end of the day, if somehow we as a community, and I'm not just talking about educators, but we as a community can reach out to our youth and genuinely care about each and every one of them by asking them about their day, about what they're interested in, that show that there is somebody there who will listen and support that particular kid. And at the end of the day, all of the kids, that we will see huge changes in the behaviors of these kids. And particularly, they will probably learn better because they will not have to worry about or, deal with the stress and the stressors that come from that trauma in the classroom.
So I kind of connect, the question that we were talking about before the break and what we're talking about now in the sense that, I don't know, Kris, it's like the injustice that the chip that you carry on your shoulder manifests itself in a deep understanding that it is that one. And hopefully it's more than one. Hopefully it's many. But if it's just one, that makes all the difference in the world, right? And that's a social justice issue. Every kid deserves the one. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, exactly. And, as our communities and our civilization has grown, the numbers of people have grown, to levels and numbers that were never expected to make a community thrive. And why I say that is that my belief is when we look back at human civilization, we grew up typically in small communities, tribes.
Yep.
And, there is a reason the adage is, it takes a community to raise a child. And that community has dissolved around that purpose.
Yep.
Families move away from one another. You grow up, and especially in the 50s and 60s, you're expected to leave the house at age 18 and move away from the family and find your career. And that has, I believe, damaged the community feel around how to raise children in a way that's sustainable and safe.
Yeah.
And we've lost it 100%. And I think that we need to go back to taking care of our neighbor's kids, right? Or noticing that if a kid is out on the street and they're struggling, that we stop the car and we go, "Are you okay?" Those little tiny things will really help.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Kris, before we get into your time as principal at Big Picture Ukiah, that's going to happen shortly, I want to talk about an idea I heard for the very first time from you. So you wrote a blog post for the Ukiah Daily Journal. And by the way, I read all your blog posts, loved them all. And you wrote this one about a year ago, I think, about a concept that you called interest-based learning. And I had not heard this term before, but it aligns with purpose-driven learning and other hyphenated concepts like project-based learning when it comes with a purpose and student agency. So I want to have you explain interest-based learning, but let's do it through a series of prompts. So I'll provide the prompt. I think there might be 4 or 5 of them, and then you provide like a brief response to the prompt. Does that sound okay?
Sounds perfect.
Awesome. Okay, so the first one, number 1, why does interest-based learning seem to motivate students?
everyone wants to learn something that interests them. And it's really hard currently with so many distractors, especially in the digital age, that will allow kids to feel agency around their learning. So it feels like most students, by the time they hit around fifth or sixth grade, have lost their control over what they're learning. They're being told things that they need to learn.
Mhm.
And in the old days, that may have worked fine because that was an expectation and there were less distractors to tell them otherwise. So where the data shows is that students lose interest in education typically around fourth, fifth, definitely by sixth grade. And if you talk to any educator who sees that range of kids, they would agree with me. And maybe the reason being of this problem, the problem of agency and interest in learning is because there are so many distractors right now that says, hey, why don't you learn or do something around music or video games or anything along those lines that give kids the ability to choose what they want to do and what they want to pursue when they get home. If they pick up their phone, they have a million things they can look at, and ultimately they're learning about something. It may be something that is not academically rich, but they're ultimately learning about something that they have interest in. And so by the time fifth or sixth grade rolls around and their brains have developed to the point where they know that they can choose things and they're being told that they can't learn what they want to learn, but instead have to learn this particular math equation or they have to learn about this particular science, and there's no connection to their real life, then the kids shut down. You combine that with the fact that kids by this point have already been told through their actions and behaviors that they're either good or bad students. And the bad students, so-called bad students, the ones that have been given the bad grades or the bad, remarks or the negative feedback, they're just done by that point. They don't want to learn. And so when you tell a kid instead, hey, maybe let's look at what you're interested in. And let me ask you, Johnny or Samantha, what you want to learn about. And we'll pursue that with every ounce of energy I have as a teaching assistant, learner, teacher, whatever you want to call yourself. Then hopefully the kid will say, okay, yeah, I'm interested in learning more about how to grow fruit trees, or I'm very interested in cars. And it is the job of the teacher to figure out the next part of it, which is how to incorporate all those other parts into it, but get the kid or get the learner involved in their own learning. Ask them, what do you want to learn about? They may not know right off the bat, but ultimately, if you give them that choice, they will give you feedback.
Okay, so perfect. So kid who's, been asked what they're interested in is feeling that sense, that intrinsic sense of motivation. Okay, so the second one, Kris, is how does interest-based learning then lay the groundwork for creativity and critical thinking?
Well, I don't think it inherently does. I think your job, the teacher's role changes and to make sure that those two things are actually hit. If I ask a young child at age 11 or 12, what are you interested in? They say, oh, motorbikes, right? Motorcycles.
Yeah.
And you start to understand more. You continue to pursue that conversation and figure out why they like motorcycles. And you get them, lack of a better term, a Bloom's taxonomy process, right?
Right.
Of, let's get some basic knowledge about the motorcycles, and let's get some understanding around it. And you continue to push and push where you now as a teacher are saying, okay, well, why motorcycles over cars? Have we looked at accident rates, right? Do you know why these things are happening on motorcycles? And then you force the kid to go through this process of critical thinking where it's now completely tied to their own real life and their real own interest. And they're probably going to pursue that process of learning at that level because they're interested in it now, rather than coming up with some random generic learning curricula or topic that they have no interest in it, interests in. We know through science that the kids have to have some sort of prior knowledge around any particular, concept or thing that you need to teach them. You have to, right? And for some kids that works, right? And some kids it doesn't because they don't have the prior knowledge moving into that particular lesson. So just bring it to them. Ask them, right? Come at it from a skills-based approach as opposed to a content-based approach, and you will win every time.
Wow, love that. And I love the connection, between, just simply asking the why question and the inevitable, what seems like inevitable creativity and critical thinking that comes when you ask why, which just doesn't get asked enough. Okay. So then, finally, in terms of just teasing out what interest-based learning is, Kris, and this is a kind of a buzzword, I think, that has been used so much in education now, and I think people struggle with it, but I know you care about it, which is like, how does interest-based learning then foster a sense of agency in kids? Like, what is agency? We all talk about it, but to you, what is it? And how does interest-based learning kind of help kids develop that sense of agency?
It's a tough one. Off the top of your head, it seems like it would immediately create agency if you say, hey, what are you interested in? Now let's pursue it, right?
Right.
The ability for a kid to say, yeah, I'm interested in motorcycles should create agency. But the reality is that a lot of times when a kid has been effectively programmed since TK or kindergarten to do what the teacher says at all times, when you finally turn around and say, what, I'm not going to move anywhere with you until you tell me what you want to learn, they don't trust you. You have to go through a process of what some people who's listening have heard, unschooling, to get to that point. And so you get situations where, and to be honest, I haven't done much work around this at those age levels, at 5th or 6th grade.
Yeah.
I think that there are problems with testing requirements that would maybe hamper a teacher from going down this road. I actually, at the end of the day, would disagree that actually would slow the process down of getting kids to score high. I think it actually would probably result in kids getting better test scores if you go down this road. But when you get a kid at the high school level, which is where I typically live, when you say, hey, let's go down this road, I want you to have agency. I want you to tell me what you're interested in. I want to create an inquiry project or whatever around this topic. I want you to get out and work in the community around this topic. They don't trust you and they don't believe it's real because nobody's asked them for their own opinion. We as parents, the parents of my generation have gone through a huge transformation where we helicopter. Even the parents that wouldn't call themselves helicopter parents are still doing a lot to hold their kids back from exploring, to get out and be creative, because we're so worried about what the television has told us in the media that kids are unsafe at all times. And the data does not actually show that. But we don't let our kids go out and get into trouble or go explore because we're so worried about what's going to happen out on the streets if we're not paying attention. So you have that scenario at home, you have that scenario in the classroom. And when you ask a kid, why don't you tell me what you want to do and then go pursue it? It takes a long time. Once they finally figure it out, then all bets are off and everything changes. And I've seen it happen 1,000 times at my school, but sometimes it takes kids, half a year to a year to change their mindset.
Okay, cool. So I was looking for a couple of examples, but we're going to get to that in a second. I'm going to tee this up by bringing you into your principalship at South Valley High School. So again, you were the principal at South Valley High School in Ukiah from 2015 to 2023. And Kris, there is this polished 15-minute video at Big Picture Learning's website that really captures how student-driven learning is like, lighting a fire in the fireplace of a previously cold, dark, abandoned house. That was what was in my mind as I was thinking about this. And so for our listeners who don't know much about big picture learning, I'm going to build a 3-part question here. So here goes. So you lead South Valley High School in Ukiah through the process of becoming Big Picture Ukiah. So briefly, Kris, walk us through the why and the how. Paint us a picture of the process of transforming with your faculty, staff, students, and parents from SVHS to BPU. What was the tipping point that led you down this road less traveled?
So let me just clarify. I want to say big picture became a vehicle for ultimately the model that we ended up creating. We knew we needed to do something different. And I didn't know anything about big picture, and I'll explain big picture more in a moment, but we knew that there was a problem on our campus. I had been a teacher there for a couple years prior to becoming the principal, and we were a fairly traditional continuation school where kids would come for half a day, sometimes a full day, and they would do packet work, and then off they went to figure out the rest of their lives with literally no skills other than how to fill out packets. And I had been teacher there on and off for about 4 years-ish, kind of hard to put the timeline together because I left mid-career to go get my master's, came back, left again to go get my PhD, came back. And so, but I knew the school, I knew it well. And I was really concerned about what the kids were leaving with a diploma, and seeing that most of them had no idea what to do post high school. They had zero skills. And the moment that everything really changed was that one of our top students from a particular year, about 2, maybe 3 years prior to this moment, had graduated, worked at McDonald's, and then she came back to visit, and she was a different human being, and not for the better. She had found her life had been derailed by drugs, probably methamphetamines, and I had seen it multiple times. In fact, I had, just prior to this experience, had to go be the officiant at one of my students' memorials for after she passed away from drugs. The parents asked me to do that, and I was honored, but also horribly impacted by this. And so to see this other student come back to visit and not being able to comprehend the conversations that we were having with her, I knew we had to do something different. And my dean at the time, and I can't remember if that experience happened prior to me becoming the principal or it happened at the very beginning. I believe it happened prior to me becoming principal, but I had the conversation the moment I became principal where I said, look, we've got to do something. We have to do something to get these kids skills, to feel that they have purpose and feel like they've got something they can hang their hat on the moment they walk out these doors of the school with graduation. We cannot do this to our community. I want to make sure that not only the kids feel like they're safe, that they have purpose, but I also feel that if they have purpose and they feel safe and they're contributing to their community in a way that they feel good about, then the rest of the community becomes safe. The rest of the community becomes, having more pride, and forgive me, I don't like that word, but they have pride for the community, this town that seems to have some pretty significant problems around homelessness and drug use.
Right.
We were seeing a cycle of abuse with drugs and alcohol that had been seen in our own schools generation after generation. We had to stop that. And so I went to my dean and I said, we've got to find some model that we can use to change all of this. Using the concepts of the one and all these pieces along those lines, we decided that this big picture thing that my dean had heard about, we should take a look at it because we were trying to do it on our own. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. And so we went and looked and we went, yep, this is it. Let's do it. We're implementing it tomorrow.
And then the journey begins as everybody in your community begins to go through it. So Kris, I think at this point, it's really good to kind of get very specific about the impact that a move like this, a transformation like this, actually has. So in that same video, a young student named Mercy talks about a mural project focused on missing and murdered Indigenous women. And you shared that Mercy's story has great meaning to you. So how so? What is that story?
Right. So Mercy was a student just like many others who comes from extreme trauma. And as a principal, unlike a teacher, you have to hear all the stories.
Right.
I've learned many times through that as a teacher, and I'm back teaching again, is that you as a teacher, able to survive 150 kids a day or whatever, you get to turn off those stories and never engage in them if you want to. I don't suggest that, but it is very easy to not hear the stories of your students because we know about this concept of secondary trauma. And we can talk about that more if we want to, but as a principal, you get to hear them all, and you sometimes have to hear them all. And I don't think there's a story that I haven't heard yet. It's intense. So Mercy comes to our school, just like many others, but she has a little bit of a fire behind her that many of my students do not have, where she wants to make some changes. So Mercy becomes effectively a leader at our school, engaging in internships, particularly projects like the one that you mentioned in our community. And I start to engage with her, as many of our other teachers do, to ask her to do more and more and more. We want to give her more and more purpose. We want her to show and model things that she's doing. And ultimately, she brings the projects that she's interested onto our campus and in the community, for lack of a better term. I mean, we look at our whole community as our campus, just to be real clear.
Yeah.
But she becomes a leader, which, without spoiling anything, she's so great that we ended up hiring her the year she graduates to become a paraprofessional, because she's just that impactful.
Wow. And I love the idea, Kris, that Mercy is almost carrying the same injustice chip on her shoulder that you are. And that must have been, why you aligned with her. Okay, so there's another student, again, in the same video, named Miranda, who talks about an internship she did with the South Valley Youth Leadership Association. And her project had to do with a local smoke shop or smoke shops selling canisters of nitrous oxide, which she felt was wrong. So what makes her story, Kris, a sort of big picture story?
So her story is, again, like many others, her story of trauma and despair continues to this day, but she has this ability to smile and care for others like no other. And so she has this innate ability to connect with adults on a level that you don't typically see with teenagers, especially who go through as much trauma as she does. Her story, though, the things that she's done or did when she was there, is just an example of what many students have done, where they take on things that they're passionate about. And why she chose this project, I don't know. But she took it on. She engaged into the process. She reached out to community members, went before city council, got changes on a level both legally and personally. She made some major changes. And what's different about the school that we designed is that she, if she wanted to, could engage into that project 100% of her day. We changed the school so that students don't have classes. They, in the traditional sense, they find something, they pursue it, and we build the subject matter, the things that in California we use through Common Core.
Yeah.
We use the skill acquisition and the skills to drive the learning through whatever the interest is. So science, math, English, whatever, social studies, whatever we can figure out a way to embed those skills into her project, that is how we get our kids, and her in particular, to pursue those things. And she did amazing work and things that will last even to today.
Wow. Two great examples of interest-based learning where purpose and passion is driving a student forward, and they're motivated and they care about the issue that they're working on. That's great, Kris. So before we go to break, I have to ask, again, you're back in the classroom. You're no longer the principal at Big Picture Ukiah. Are you worried, Kris, about the powerful forces of traditional education, pushing Big Picture Ukiah back into a traditional high school? Or has the infrastructure been laid that makes that sort of future-proof, if you will?
Yeah, great question. Something I didn't answer before, and I'll kind of address it a little bit here. When developing this program into becoming what it is, I looked very carefully, strategically at how do we create something that's just not going to fall apart when I walk away. I knew that I had about a 5-year shelf life personally to get this school up and running. COVID hit. I stayed on a little bit longer, but I knew that I couldn't stay for long because I'm a change agent. I'm not a status quo manager. Like that's just not who I am. So the process of building this program was designed through a facilitation process that I ran with my entire team of teachers. In fact, the entire staff, not just my secretaries, my janitors, everybody came to the table. We took days during the summer, even in the middle of the year, where we pulled subs out to cover classes. And we went through a very structured facilitation process that is basically bulletproof, in my opinion, where you look deeply into the reasons that the educators, the staff members are in doing the work that they're doing. And you get into the foundations of that passion of helping kids. You want the teachers to say it out loud. I'm here for kids. And then the next question becomes, well, what do we do to help these kids, right? It's such a simple concept, but you have to have them say it. And you can't just tell them that you want the teachers to say it and the staff members to say it themselves. So then this process becomes, well, how do we get all this to work? And one of the questions, going back to this question that you just asked me, is how do you get something like this to survive forever? Right. You get community. You get community on board. So we knew that in order to get our kids interested into fulfilling effectively project-based learning, but around their interests, we knew that we had to get them out into the community to become not only workers, I guess, apprentices, interns, wherever they are. But we wanted to do it in a way where the community became reliant on our school to provide kids who are genuinely interested in helping these businesses and agencies and institutions where the board members who are elected by our community would hear from their constituents that, oh my gosh, these South Valley kids, effectively big picture kids, are helping our business, our agency, our institution on a level we've never been able to live and work at before. We need the school to exist. And when you do that, there's nothing that the administration at the district level can do about it, because now the board members are 100,000% behind these kids and what we're doing. It's going to survive. And it's only going to be somebody who's going to come in and just blow everything up despite whatever their job situation is going to be and say, this program's done for. They know that they're going to get a lot of flack and that they're going to be out in a couple of years as a superintendent or whoever. That's the only way that thing falls apart. Or the state walks in and says, all these weird things that you're doing at the school that's not actually aligned with ed code for California, which I can talk about at a different point, but that would be the other problem. But I accounted for all that. I looked at the rules. I looked at ed code. I went, what? It doesn't say we can't do this. Let's go for it. So that's the other way you do it.
Yeah. So listeners, if you boil it down to one thing, when you lay a cornerstone for hopefully what will be, or not hopefully, that you really want to ensure will be a cathedral that will far outlast you, it is community. You involve everybody, and then everybody becomes part of that fabric, and it lives on. So that's awesome, Kris. So hey everyone, we have been talking to Kris Swett, who in 2007 was honored by his Ukiah, California community as Teacher of the Year. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there. Are you interested in hearing weekly conversations with authors, leaders, and practitioners at the forefront of learning and education innovation? Then you'll love the Getting Smart podcast. This podcast amplifies the incredible work being done by some of the most innovative minds in education. Learn new leadership styles, new technologies, new frameworks and mindsets, and get the fuel you need to stay motivated and curious. Together, we can empower all learners to thrive. It's available at gettingsmart.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hi, friends. This is Toy Hirschman from EntreEd. It is my great honor to uplift this excellent podcast, What School Could Be. As always, we are super excited to support innovation in education. We've been lucky enough to feature some of the incredible What School Could Be educators on our podcast. If you are looking to be inspired by entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial educators and other great minds from across the world, check out the Entre Ed Talk podcast, and please like and subscribe and leave a review. Thanks for tuning in.
Are you ready to shake things up in the classroom? Then get ready to blast off into the future of education with the Teacher Nerds podcast. Join Joe DiPaolo and Ron Nober as they share their own experiences, as well as talk with guests who are experts and innovators in education. From engaging teaching techniques to the latest educational technology, this podcast is a must-listen for anyone passionate about the future of learning. Subscribe and get ready to learn with the Teacher Nerds podcast.
Hey everyone, we are back with Kris Swett, and this is the final segment of this awesome conversation. Glad you've been along for the ride. So Kris, you shared with me your story of growing up in challenging socioeconomic circumstances in Santa Rosa, California. Your dad was your fifth grade teacher. In fact, you also shared that though you were getting amazing grades in high school, during your junior year, you realized the high school education system was bogus and not useful, which are your words. I want to take this information, Kris, and zoom up to the 30,000-foot level and talk about why kids drop out of school. So I've been vocal about shifting the conversation towards the school and away from the dropout who has lost the relevance of education, if they ever had it in the first place. So we pass laws that turn dropouts into truants. We chase after them and try to drag them into school. But no one, to my knowledge, has ever filed a police report against a school for being obsolete. So I wonder what your thoughts are about this. And sorry, it's one of those provocative moments, but I had to ask.
Yeah. Public education in the conventional sense, I would say not only doesn't serve kids, it actually damages kids. This was a quote that was made to me by a dear friend of mine, a colleague of mine who works through Big Picture. He was effectively, in a sense, a consultant coach, kind of pushed me, knew that I was kind of one of those people that would take risks on a level that most administrators would not. And so when we decided to go forward with the Big Picture, he said, let's just go all in. We're doing things that I don't think any school has ever done in the state of California, a public school. And we're a public school, by the way.
Yeah.
But he said one time years ago that public education damages kids. And, even at the time I went, I'm not sure about that. I kind of hemmed and hawed around it. Now back in the classroom, and I purposely went back to a conventional high school recently, I agree 1000%. I don't think conventional education actually does good for almost anyone. I think there's a few kids that it's good for, and they're typically kind of higher, middle of the road kids. But I think that if you look at the top end kids, they are stressed out at levels that no person, let alone a teenager, should ever have to experience.
Yeah,
the pressures of AP honors classes, the sports that should have been a stress reliever is actually one of the biggest stressors in schools. They're not able to function like a teenager should. It's unbelievable. So that's the high end. When you look at the kids that I typically work with or have been working with, and I would suggest it's the 50% and below, the kids that are just, they're done with school. They don't find that education is helping them in any particular way because it's still, even with Common Core, which, love it or hate it, Common Core, with the intentions behind it to increase skill-based academics as opposed to content-based, I would suggest 78% of the kids at my particular high school are still content-driven.
Right.
They don't find the use in it, especially when we're sitting in an age of AI and Google, where if you need an answer to a particular question, you can look it up in seconds.
Right.
And so they're not attaining the skills that they need to become the hairdresser or the mechanic or the farmer or the whatever they want to do that they know does not include a 4-year BA. And I want to be clear. I think most kids know that there needs to be further training in whatever field they want to go into. And a lot of times college, community colleges can provide that in trade schools, which are oftentimes scams in my opinion. But that they know some college is necessary. But a 4-year degree for most kids is not on their radar. And they're told since kindergarten that the measure of success is a 4-year degree. And so by the moment they step into school and the kids determine that they're not going to a 4-year college for whatever reason, either they're not ready for it, they don't want to, they don't have the resources to go to school, they're basically being told since the day one that they're failures.
Yes.
And that is, I get why that is the measurement of success. Teachers, you, me, Josh, all the people probably listening, we got success through going to college. And so what do you expect the message to be when a teacher who found success through going to college, that they expect that their kids that they're teaching are going to go into college and find the same measurement of success? I actually think it damages kids. That message needs to be changed. We need to honor the dishwashers, the waiters, the front office people, the secretaries, all the people that work in our communities. They need to be honored and not being told, even if it's not directly told, that they're not hitting the measurements of success that's being laid in front of them. That message needs to change. And it's causing kids, in my mind, at-risk kids, to find ways to numb themselves from this message by using drugs and alcohol or engaging in risky behaviors. Yeah, I might be sounding a little bit over dramatic about this, but I actually think there's a lot of truth to it because I see it on a daily basis.
So, Kris, that's a perfect segue to this next question. You shared with me the titles of books that have been an outsized influence in your life, including Essays on the Wisdom of Life by Schopenhauer. And I read some of these essays and built this simple question for you. We talk a lot these days, Kris, about the portrait of a graduate. So what is the portrait of a wise school leader? Not good, not great, not effective, but wise.
Yeah. First of all, the amount of amazing research you've done into this podcast and others, I just want to commend you on this.
Thank you.
It's amazing what you do. So the work of Schopenhauer aligned with Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching, or Buddhism, which I have done a lot of research. I wouldn't call myself Buddhist, but I've done a lot of research. You get to a point where you start to understand that either the concepts of less is more, or that you accept the status quo and not continually fight for change when change isn't necessary, or swim upstream when in fact it's just going to cause more problems than it will solutions. You get to a point where you have to just accept that the people in front of you, the human beings that are in front of you, are the way they are because of things that are outside of not only your control as a leader, but also their own control. You gain a sense of wisdom that I wish all people could incorporate into their daily lives. I am not a sage. I've got a lot, by no estimations, am I any better than anybody else that you've ever, listened or interviewed, or I'm definitely not smarter than anybody, but I do find that the lessons that I've learned through those two particular texts, including the most recent one by Sapolsky, which talks about free will, is that you start to understand that people do things, their behaviors they're completely outside of their control. That we can only teach the kid that is in front of us and not the one that we wish they were. And the ability to look at every kid and say, or even adult for that matter, as a principal, to know that your staff, when they're acting in ways that you cannot even fathom the reason why they're saying and doing the things that they're doing, that it is because of the situation that they had that morning with their loved one, or that the kid got home to a house that is a 1-bedroom apartment and there's 12 uncles and aunts living in there and they couldn't get their homework done because there was no time, or they have to take care of their younger brother or sister and their homework couldn't be done because of that, or that they were beat up and abused by their father or mother as a child. And so the reason that they flip out when you raise your voice as a teacher is because you're triggering something in them that they may not even understand why they're being triggered. If somehow we can understand that these behaviors are because the lives that we or they have lived are forcing them to be this way and not being punitive will be a great, great help. And I don't know anything that has influenced me more than that, than those particular texts, and then incorporating them into my own life has been extremely helpful.
Oh, that's awesome, Kris. And I thank you for your kind words about the podcast. As I spent these last 2 weeks diving deep into your life and your work, it became very clear to me. And by the way, I don't think we've actually used this word in this conversation thus far, that your wisdom is derived from your deep empathy, and to me, what you've just told us and our listeners is that sometimes, you can be super empathetic and really try to understand what's going on with people, but you don't necessarily have to act, right? And that sometimes not acting, just continuing to be aware of what's happening in people's lives is the best pathway to take, the wise pathway. But when there are moments when you can act, meaning that you give voice to that person who's experiencing that trauma or coming from a difficult situation or really yearning to live a more relevant and purposeful life of learning, that's when you step in. Is that a kind of a fair way of looking at it?
100%. And in fact, I would, my personality lends itself to that. I will speak up for those who are not being able to say anything. And I've sat in multiple meetings as per the letter of recommendation that you mentioned, where I will say nothing until the end, where, people in the room will suggest a particular change of course or action. And I will say, but are you thinking about what this means to all of these people who do not have control over their lives? And so somebody has to stand up. And I have ruffled many feathers. And I have to urge somebody who's listening to be that person to stand up and not be worried about your job. It is only the work that needs to be done that matters, and not the salary that comes out of it. I've been homeless. I've been at the top to the bottom in my life, and I've just gotten to a point where I will not sit idly by where I see people are making decisions that will ultimately make their lives better and easier at the expense of others. And the reality is, a lot of the times when those decisions are being made, they're not thinking it through. And so somebody has to just say, but what if this is actually impacting other people?
Yeah. So speaking of ruffling feathers, and this is going to bring our conversation today, Kris, to a close, we all have giants upon whose shoulders we stand, those wise and wonderful individuals who have coached and guided and mentored us and opened doors for us. So again, to end this episode, I would love for you to give a shout out to someone we both consider a giant upon whose shoulders we stand. And that person is Robert Landau. So what does he mean to you, and how do you carry Robert with you each day?
Yeah, Robert was introduced to me by a mutual friend that I work with here in the school district. He said, he knew who I was, all these things that I've been mentioning about the kind of the person I am. He just looked at me and goes, "You've got to meet Robert." And he goes, "He's going to love you." So we got on a Zoom call a while back. This is just going into COVID, maybe in the middle. I can't even remember anymore. Mm-hmm. And we talked, and Robert is a master at reading people and understanding their intentions. I've watched him do this personally so many times, and people who have been around him are just in awe of his ability to watch him just break somebody apart in a good way and understand who they are. And he did that with me. He goes, yep, you're the person, right? And he uses a myriad of tools to do this. And I think at the end of the day, the tools are not enough. He just has an inherent ability to read people and understand people. That makes the tools even that much more prominent. So we came together to work on some things to change schools, to try to give an alternative around these ideas that we've been talking about the entire time. What I call interest-based learning or project-based learning around things that kids are genuinely interested in, getting them outside to experience things. Robert has been a huge voice and very successful in trying to give agency to the kids and find ways to better engage a learning experience that is much more fruitful for those kids and their families and their communities. He's done it multiple times around the world, and I'm sure he's probably done it many more times I don't even know about because he's humble. And so he and I have worked very closely together. I hope to work with him even closer moving forward to give schools opportunities to make changes in their own systems, foundations, whatever it need be to help better engage these kids. And his voice and his ability to connect with others, to get them on board and understand that change is possible and that there are ways to do it, I think was his attraction to me, where I've actually done it. And there are really specific tangible ways to go through the process of trying to convince and understand for other leaders to go, yeah, this change is possible and let's go for it. And I have never found anybody else like Robert who kind of talks my language, and he does it much better than I do. And I hope to do much more with him and make some significant change, real change, not just talk anymore. And we've gone through the talk. It's time to make actual change. And I think the two of us have actually done it. I'm hoping that we can, for the sake of just doing the right thing, help others make change, however that may be.
That's fabulous, Kris. Robert is in his 70s and he's still running all over the world in Asia and Europe and the US. It's amazing. He's the Energizer Bunny. He inspires me every day. He did my Clifton Strengths and I felt like he was looking straight into my soul.
That's right. Me too.
He just has that ability. So we'll dedicate this episode today to Robert Landau, and we thank him for all of his work. And Kris, I thank you for all of your work and everything that you carry on your shoulders in terms of the way that you care about kids and about their voices and their backgrounds. It really has been inspiring for me to spend this time getting to know you and to be able to do this interview today. So we wish you the best of luck as you decide what your next steps are. And I really appreciate you being on the show today.
And I appreciate you too. Thank you. And I hope you are able to give out any information necessary for people to contact me. I'm not in this for the money, but I am in it for helping others. And so please let people know that if they have any questions about facilitating the process to make change happen, they can always contact me anytime. I'm willing to help.
That's awesome. We'll put it in the show notes. That's great.
Great.
Thank you, Kris.
Thank you, Josh.
Our editor, creative consultant, and sound engineer is the talented Evan Kurohara. Our theme music is created by a remarkable pianist, Michael Sloan. Producer of 12 albums with over 100 songs, Michael Sloan is featured in Apple Music, Spotify, and all major music platforms. You can also find his work on his YouTube channel. Michael has listeners in over 100 countries and 2,000 cities. We'd be grateful if you would support these episodes with leading edge, innovative and imaginative educators and students by giving us your own rating and writing a review wherever you get your podcasts. This series is sponsored by Education Change Agent, Ted Dintersmith, executive producer of the award-winning documentary film, Most Likely to Succeed, and author of the best-selling book, What School Could Be. If you are committed to rolling up your sleeves and joining thousands of educators, business professionals, nonprofit leaders, and parents as we reimagine education to be relevant and learner-centered, please join the What School Could Be global online community. Simply log in to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org or download the What School Could Be app from your favorite app store. The What School Could Be podcast is brought to you by Josh Rapoon Productions. Send your feedback to josh@whatschoolcouldbe.org. Follow the show on Twitter @WSCB Podcast and on LinkedIn @Josh Rapoon. Listeners, one of the most important things we all can do is to bring kindness and compassion into the world. For sure, we need a surplus of both right now. Until next time, ahui ho, and thank you for listening to the What School Could Be podcast.